One thing to look for in the year ahead is focus on the gaming industry, both in terms of investors and in terms of regulators. Tons of money continues to flow into this sector, and there are tons of developments there. And there's an awful lot going on, and you can hear from an anti-money laundering perspective some concerns. Unlike gambling per se, in the United States, gaming is largely an unregulated industry. And what you're seeing now are regulators focusing on it. Past director of FinCEN mentioned in a speech that FinCEN looks at some of the activity in this space as involving money transmission. So look for further developments in this space in terms of expectations for that industry. Also, look for them to reach out and potentially cooperate with law enforcement as well. Again, there's a lot of activity and a lot of money flowing through this sector right now. Regulators are really focused on innovation and not getting in the way of innovation in the tech space. They're doing this for a couple of reasons. One, they want their regulated sectors to keep up with what's going on elsewhere in the world. And two, they want to know what kinds of fintech support they can count on their regulated entities using for compliance purposes. The more the regulators understand the existence and development of some of these tools and methods, processing information, processing payments, the more that they can expect their regulated entities to use them and talk about them. So what I'm seeing right now is the fintech sector figuring out ways in which they can talk to regulators and engage with them, even if they're not directly regulated themselves. Because the more the regulators know, the better off it is for both the regulated sector and the fintech sector. Now, as we talk about innovation and we talk about making regulations more effective in the anti-money laundering space, you could see the possibility down the road for some more direct regulation of the fintech service providers as well. They're becoming nodes of information. And for an AML regulator, that's actually quite important. Look at the real estate sector as an example. There's currently an advance notice of proposed rulemaking out there with respect to the real estate sector, in which FinCEN is trying to figure out how it's going to regulate better in that space and how to get more transparency. Well, to the extent that comments come in response to that advance notice of proposed rulemaking that begin to discuss some of the technical solutions that real estate actors are now using with respect to information and payments, you could potentially see a regulator focusing on some of those tech providers as a source of information, whether it's through direct regulation or potentially indirect regulation through the real estate actors themselves. Another thing to look for, particularly in the payments space, is a demand for greater clarity from regulators in terms of who is regulated and how they're regulated. There's a blurring line between those who are providing financial services and those who are providing support to financial service providers. To a certain extent, the more these technical solutions cross that line and essentially begin to provide financial services themselves, the more we need to focus on how they are going to be regulated. There's a lot of difference across jurisdictions right now. Traditional financial institutions, such as banks, are now seriously considering how they have to think about their relationships with other financial service providers, particularly in the payment space, and particularly with some of these technical solutions. They need to know who is regulated under what rules in which jurisdictions. Some of that is now becoming quite complicated in terms of rules and exceptions to rules and exceptions to rules. I see a lot of banks now asking questions of the entities that they're engaged with to make sure that they understand what rules they're operating under. Another thing to look for this year is a continuing battle on the Hill between industry sectors. We have the traditional, highly regulated financial sector lobbying for more rules to be imposed on some of the new financial service providers or the new techs out there. We have the data industry, the social media platforms that are engaging in other types of services in addition to providing social media content. They are getting into provision of services, particularly financial services. We're seeing them lobby on the Hill for rules that might favor them and might enable them to continue along their path. We're seeing a lot of focus with respect to cryptocurrency, and particularly with respect to stable coins. Look for the actors in that space to be spending a decent amount of money in their lobbying efforts. So there's a lot going on the Hill, and when there's a lot of activity on the Hill, there's a lot of focus by industry. So follow the money in that sense in terms of who's lobbying whom and who might be behind particular legislative proposals.